Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be going over tricks and tips that I have to get a painting to go from looking something like this to something like this. Two disclaimers before we start. First is that this was a commission, so I am in full artist gremlin mode. So if you see me show up in the footage, just pretend I look cute and have makeup on. Two, I don't think there's any right or wrong way to paint. These are just tips that have helped me over the years, and hopefully they can help you too. Take what you want, leave what you don't like. It's up to you. And with that, let's get into the painting. So to start any of my pieces, I typically start with a rough outline. In the case of a commission, I usually trace. I know some people will say, that's cheating! But really, if I'm doing a commission, odds are the person wants whatever the piece is to look as accurate to what they're having commissioned. In this case, I was commissioned to do a dog. They obviously want the piece to look like their dog. And sure, I could draw it out by hand, but it's going to take me longer than tracing it. If I just trace it, it takes less time, I can charge less, and hopefully get more commissions. Also, I don't know that it's exactly cheating, because it really just gets down basic anchor points. You'll know where your eyes are supposed to be roughly, your nose, and the general outline. It's really not getting down a lot of the details. That'll come in the painting. And as you will see, it's not 100% accurate. Now when I'm working on my own paintings, I tend to use the grid method. That's the method I used for both of these paintings. So what that means is I take a photo and I bring that photo typically into Photoshop and lay a grid out over it. And then I scale that grid to my canvas, so you can scale it up in proportion and kind of gives you anchor points. So when you're laying down your outline, you know, well, this toe is supposed to fall here on this line and this toe is supposed to fall here on this line. It kind of gives you smaller sections to work with so you don't get overwhelmed by the whole piece, and you make sure that the foot is being scaled the same way the leg is being scaled, or whatever subject you're painting gets scaled, all in proportion. So once my outline is laid out, it's time to paint, and my first layer I do quick and dirty. I know some people might want to jump right into the details, or they might want to focus on one section of the painting that they're really looking forward to working on. I don't like to do that, because let's say you really want to focus on the eye, you really like the way the eye and a piece looks, and you're like, I want to work on that. And you work on that, and you make this perfect eye, and then you move forward and you realize that eye's in the wrong spot. You are not going to want to paint over that. So what I like to do is I try to work as broad as possible, try to get my values down, my general colors down, and my landmarks. So in this case, eyes, nose, and mouth, and I don't get detailed with them. They're just the general colors of those areas. So in this case, dark spots for the eyes and the mouth. And two tricks I have to make sure you're not getting too detailed too quickly and you're just trying to lay out your absolute base is, one, work with big brushes, because it's very hard to get detailed if you're working with larger brushes. And two, if you're afraid you'll get hung up on the details and you won't be looking at the broader picture, or you can't really focus on like the general colors because you're getting distracted by all the details, two tips I have for that are, one, you can either squint at your reference, then you won't be able to see all the details and you'll just be able to see like, oh, there's mostly brown in this section or green in this section, and you won't really get distracted by all the details. Or two, if you're lucky and you have something like Photoshop or some kind of photo editing and you're working from a direct photo, you can blur that image so then the details aren't there and all you can focus on are the values and the colors. Now once I have my base layer done, I do a very sneaky trick, which is probably one of my biggest cheats, which is I have a file in Photoshop with my reference image, and periodically I will take photos of my painting. I'll line up my painting as best I can with the edges of my camera to make sure that I'm getting as accurate head-on photo as I can. Then I bring that photo of my painting into Photoshop and lay it over my reference photo. And this is where the big cheat comes in. It allows me to flip back and forth between my painting and the reference photo, or to change the opacity on the painting and see exactly what is off. So in this case, I can look at what I have and say, okay, the eyes are almost in the right spot, but not quite. This eye is a little bit bigger, this eye needs to go down more or move up more. The mouth is almost right, but in my painting it's down more, it needs to come up more, or vice versa. And it makes it very easy and very quick to notice what is off about the painting versus your reference image. Is this cheating? I don't think so. I think it's using your tools to your advantage. If you feel like this is cheating or you don't have access to Photoshop, something you can do is bring your painting to a mirror and look at it in the mirror, because your eyes get so focused on how things look and how they're supposed to look that your brain kind of makes corrections for you. So even though the eyes may not be in the right spot, your brain knows where they're supposed to be and it kind of adjusts it for you, which sounds weird, but it does. But when you bring it to a mirror, you don't have the previous knowledge of what it looks like and what it's supposed to look like. You see it for what it is, and your brain sees what's in front of it instead of what it's supposed to look like, and you can pretty quickly see what's off. Also, sometimes just taking a photo of your piece will help, because you're used to looking at it one size, and then when it's brought down to a different size, your brain is seeing it kind of for the first time in this new setting. And so it tends to pick up on some of the differences a little bit better. So that's just another tip. So once I've compared the photo of my painting to my reference and I figure out what things need to be changed, I move forward making small adjustments, trying not to get hung up on any of the details, but just making the piece overall slowly look more like the reference. And I continue painting, trying to get my piece looking more accurate. When I get hung up on something or I think it's close, but something's a little bit off, I'll take another photo, bring that updated picture into my Photoshop file, compare where I am now to what the reference looks like, see what else needs to be changed, and I keep going and doing that. So I do have 3 tips for working with acrylic paint that I have found work for me, and hopefully they will work for you. And my 3 major tips are: 1, work in washes. Oil paints stay wet for considerably longer than acrylic paints. So if you're used to oil paints, acrylic paints are a very different beast. So with oil paint, you have the ability to keep reworking certain parts of your painting. You have more ability to blend because the paint is still wet, and you can work with it a little bit more. But because acrylic paint dries so freaking fast, you can work on a part of a painting, transition to another part, come back to the part you just worked on, and it's already dry. And it makes it kind of a pain in the booty. So my tip is paint in translucent layers and slowly build them. I think it gives a depth and a richness and a more cohesive piece than putting down thick opaque layers and trying to blend them and then trying to make different pieces of your painting match. I feel like if you kind of work your way around the whole piece in these translucent layers, it builds more naturally and more cohesively. That's what I have found works for me. If working in thick opaque layers works for you, do your thing, but that's what works for me. So I'm passing that information on to you. The second tip I have for trying to seamlessly blend acrylics, because it does dry so friggin' fast, is using multiple brushes. So when I'm working on a section that I really want to be nice and blended, I will typically have my base color on one brush, a highlight color on another brush, a shadow or low light color on another brush, and then I might also have a dry brush and a wet brush, and I switch between these 3 to 5 brushes, using them periodically to try to meld things as much as possible. I'll typically lay down my base color, add some highlight, add some low light, either go back in with my main color brush again, or I'll use the dry brush to kind of buff it out, or my wet brush to try to meld them all together. And then the third tip I have for making your acrylic paintings look as realistic as possible has to do with shading and colors. And for that, I kind of have like 3 sub-tips. The first tip that I have is in regard to shading, and that tip is don't use black. So people starting out, when they do their shading, they typically reach for black, or they combine black with whatever color they're using. And my general rule of thumb is don't. I would say the only cases in which you actually use black is if a material that you're depicting is actually black. In this case, the boots. But really, if you look close up on those boots, there's not a lot of actual black for the overall boot. I would say about maybe half of it is actually black, 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 and the rest is a mixture of colors. So there will be instances where you do use black, either depicting something that is black or depicting a really, 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 really dark shadow. But otherwise, I would say if you want your paintings to look more realistic, most shadows are not black, they are a color. Depending on what is casting the shadow, what the shadow is being cast on, what colors are surrounding it, what kind of light is reflecting or bouncing in that area. So my general rule of thumb is, rather than reaching for black, what you would want to use is the opposite color on the color wheel. So for this painting, I'm painting a golden retriever. Its base colors are somewhere between yellows and oranges. So in order to get my shadows, I used blue and mixed that with my yellows and oranges, and that's how I got my shading. So rather than it becoming these muddy, toned down colors, you get really a more realistic shading. My second tip is the colors of the environment will typically affect the color of your subject. So in this case, the dog is outside. You can see blue in the highlights of its fur because it's surrounded by the blue of the sky. In this other painting I did, you can also see how the blue of the sky is visible in the fur of the dog. Even though the dog is black, there is blue that shows up, and therefore I put it in the painting. In this painting that I did, you can also see the blue of the sky and the green of the grass in the fur of the dogs, and that's because the sun shines down on the grass and shines in the sky. Those colors get reflected and therefore affect the color of your subject. On the other hand, this ferret that I did, in the reference photo, this ferret was in a very beige room, but the client wanted me to put it on a blue-purple background, and I think at least this ferret stands out a lot more than the dog that I'm currently working on, because the dog had blue from the sky and the background ended up being blue. He seems to fit into that piece a lot better than this ferret. I think something I could have done to make this ferret blend with his background a little bit more and look like he is in a purple environment is to bring some of those purples into that ferret's fur, but I didn't do that. But moving forward, I probably would. And lastly, my third tip in regards to color and shading is that I think we tend to go more vibrant and more contrast when we're creating than what our reference actually is. And I think the reason for this is because your brain is getting all this information and it's trying to decode it in the simplest way possible so you can translate what you're seeing into what you need to make. So for instance, if you have, this is really lame, but this is just what comes to mind. If you're painting a landscape and there is a stop sign in your landscape, I think your brain automatically goes, okay, stop sign red, it picks red. And you will probably pick the most vibrant red because you know a stop sign is a very vibrant red, when realistically in that piece it might be in the background, it might have some light shining on it, and it might be more of like a muted orange or a brown, but your brain goes stop sign red, okay, I need to do red. I don't really have many examples of this in my work that I can think of except for these shoes. These are the shoes in question, and they are gold. They are a very shiny metallic gold. And so automatically my brain, someone's brain, will go, okay, gold shoe, gold paint. But when I started the piece, my base layer was a gold color because that's what my brain went, okay, gold shoe, gold painting. But really, when you look at the photo of the shoe, when looking at the reference photo, there really isn't a whole lot of actual gold visible in the shoe because it's a reflective subject. It's really bringing in all the colors of the surrounding area, and the colors are pretty muted, and for the most part, it's browns and blues. That's an extreme case because this is such a reflective surface, but that's just an example of things to think about, that even though you know something to be a certain color, you really have to look at what you're seeing and not what your brain is telling you, because even though water is blue and the ocean is blue, odds are it's reflecting all sorts of colors. So just something to keep in mind. And my last piece of advice is don't be too precious with your piece and don't be afraid to paint over parts of your painting. Like the eye situation earlier, I know there's always times where you paint part of your painting, it looks perfect, it is the best eye you've ever painted or the best hand you've ever drawn, but then you realize it's not the right size or it's in the wrong spot and you're like, but it's so good, I don't want to paint over this, I don't want to have to redraw it. So you're like, I'll just leave it, it looks really good so it's fine. You put all this care and effort into it. You know it looks really good, and so you want to hold on to it. But I guarantee you, someone will come by, look at that piece, not knowing how much time you spent on that particular part of your piece, and they'll be like, that eye is low, or that hand is not the right size, because they're looking at it from a full visual piece and not, oh my god, look at how good this hand is. So if you identify with this and you are someone who does this, I would say one of the biggest tips I can give you is to break that habit, because overall you will be a better artist and you will produce better pieces if you realize that yes, it looks great, but it's wrong. You should redo it, and you know you should redo it. You will be happier with your piece in the long run, and I guarantee you, if you painted this perfect eye or drew a perfect hand and it came out perfect, and you don't want to draw over it or paint over it, guess what? You did it once, you can do it again. So don't be afraid to rework parts of your piece that are not actually helping the overall piece. All the advice I have for right now. I hope you were able to pick up a trick or two that you'll be able to use moving forward. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!